Peninsula Credit Union offers time to 501c3 nonprofits to get their message out on iFiber1 News Radio. Here's one of those conversations. We have a great conversation in store for us here right now. We are welcoming in Roy Harrington. Good morning, Roy.
Good morning, Jeff and Vicki. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming in. And Roy's here talking about REBOOT Combat Recovery, rebootrecovery.com. It is a nationwide program that helps focus on the spiritual aspects of combat recovery, not a support group, but it provides practical help for service members and families. And there is a meeting location starting in January up at the Bridge Church in Belfair. Talk to me a little bit about this, how you became involved specifically with REBOOT, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm retired from 30 years in the Army Reserve. I retired about 10 years ago. My last assignment at the Pentagon, I worked in the Army Operations Center in the personnel section, and we tracked all of the numbers for the entire Army worldwide, who was going to war, who was coming home from war, by units and large groups of soldiers. But the most sobering thing my section did is we tracked every single soldier's death and funeral right up to the day of burial for the entire Army worldwide. Wow. And we briefed that twice a day, 7 days a week, to the Chief of Staff of the Army, the Senior General of the Army. And we got down to details, very specifically, that the soldiers whose funerals were coming the next day, we briefed who they were, how they died, where they're from, where they're going to be buried, who's doing the service, every detail. And since 9/11, the Army has sent a general officer to every single soldier's funeral.
Wow.
Unless the family asks us not to be there. And back in 2005 and 2006, we began to see what we termed at the time accidental gunshot wounds the veterans were sustaining in theater. These are soldiers who are deployed. Well, we soon figured out that in many cases, they were not accidental. Soldiers were taking their own lives while they're still deployed. At the same time, I was studying to become a minister, and as I kind of prepared for retirement, and I began to study moral theology, and came across a Methodist theologian named Walter Wink, who talked about the myth of redemptive violence. And those two things clicked, and I began to realize that there was much more going on here than just post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury. And over the last 10 years, I've been going around the state giving a talk on moral injury, the spiritual trauma of war. But up until the last 6 months, I didn't have a resource to offer to warriors to help them heal, other than individual counseling and pastoral counseling.
Right.
But now I've discovered REBOOT, and it was developed back at Fort Campbell, Kentucky by this young couple. He's a minister and she was an Army occupational therapist. And about 6 years ago, they started this program, which has now gone nationwide, but it's based around Fort Campbell, Kentucky and Clarksville, Tennessee, where I just came back from last month. And this is a 12-week, one night a week for 12 weeks chance for a small group of warriors, no more than 5 to 12, to come together to share their combat trauma, especially their emotional and spiritual combat trauma.
It would seem to me that there are only certain folks that are able to understand what all the people are going through. You would have had to kind of live through some of these things to have an open ear.
Well, I can tell you that I'm not a combat warrior.
Sure.
I was in the infantry and in the artillery, but I transferred to human resources when I was a young captain. I've never been to combat, but I know a lot of warriors.
Sure.
And for most of 2015 and 16, I was a volunteer chaplain at the VA in Seattle, while I was also a case manager working with homeless vets. And I've heard dozens and dozens of stories. And I understand veterans' pain and their wounds. And it's a wound of the soul. It's a wound of the conscience. And in many cases, it's warriors' deepest wounds. And when I retired out here 11 months ago to Allen, I realized I had a chance to bring REBOOT to North Mason and South Kitsap County. So I'm trying to reach out to our listeners who are combat veterans and invite them to come to the REBOOT class. This first one will be up in Belfair, as you mentioned, starting on Tuesday, January 8th. It's for the whole family. We want the spouse. If it's a young warrior with children, the kids can come. We're going to provide child care. We're going to have a free meal, probably sponsored by area restaurants up in Belfair. Another member of the team is trying to organize the restaurants right now. But we'll have a nice dinner for the first hour. And then the second hour will be the actual class with video and discussion and prayer. It is faith-based, but it's for people of all faiths, who believe in a higher power.
Right.
It's not particular. We're doing it at the Bridge Church because Pastor Devin Wood was nice enough to let us use his space. That's not my church, but it's great. It's really centrally located. Eventually, I've already had an offer from Shelton Presbyterian to do a course down here, maybe in the spring. And I also hope to bring the course to the state Veterans Retirement Home at Retzel up in Port Orchard in the very near future.
You can go to rebootalliance.com to find more information and some background on this. There is also a list here that we could talk about 5 reasons to give this a try. There are some here. It is led by fellow combat veterans and the spouses. What does it mean to have the whole family involved in these?
Well, the wounds of war, especially post-traumatic stress and moral injury and military sexual trauma, impacts families, impacts relationships. And warriors come home and they're different, they're changed. I believe that every warrior who goes to combat comes back wounded in some way. And spouse after spouse has told me, he's not the same, she's not the same, I don't know this person. A lot of marriages unfortunately end. We're trying to prevent that. We're trying to give families and warriors who are deeply wounded a chance to heal. In my experience as a minister, especially our World War II and Korean veterans, some of our Vietnam veterans, they only talk about these wounds when they're on their deathbeds. We're trying to give our warriors a chance to heal from this before they get to that point.
Has that something you've seen change, evolve over the time you have been involved in military service, the acceptance to be okay with your thoughts and feelings about these types of things?
That's a huge part of the military culture that we're trying to change. But even Army generals are coming forward now saying, I'm going to counseling, I'm going to get help because I need help. Before it was always, real macho, John Wayne. I'm perfect, I'm well. But we're starting to understand how deeply profound war can change you, and we want to give warriors a chance to heal, and we are trying to change that culture. It's especially a challenge on active duty for soldiers, for warriors who are still serving. But the culture has to change. It has to change, because if we don't, the number of veteran suicides is going to continue, and that's really the goal of this. We're trying to prevent veteran suicides. We're trying to help families heal, and it's a powerful opportunity for folks.
It says Reboot approaches trauma from a different angle. What is that angle?
It's that spiritual angle.
Okay.
The pastor who developed it, Evan Owens, is an evangelical Christian pastor. We are going to talk about God. We are going to talk about Jesus, but we'll talk about, like I said before, that higher power that we all believe in. But we're really trying to give warriors a chance to come and see the most challenging things that happen to them in war from a different light.
Sure.
We want them to know that we forgive them. God has already forgiven them, and we're trying to help them forgive themselves in many cases.
This weekend will be a stressful time for many. The families are gathering, and maybe this will be the first time you're going to see some family members in a long time. If you can speak to this, please do. What are some potential signs that other family members may see that then the opportunity to bring up Reboot would be a good conversation?
Well, if you've got a veteran in your family who's come back from war, and the key sign you'd see around the holidays would be a desire to withdraw.
Okay.
They don't want to engage. They don't want to talk. They don't want to talk about what happened to them in wartime. The veterans that I've met who I know have experienced a moral injury have said things to me like, Roy, God can never forgive me for what I've done. Or, if you knew the things that have happened to me in war, the things I've had to do in war, you would never talk to me. Most warriors aren't going to say that to their family. They'll say it to a VA chaplain, but they won't say it to their family.
Yeah.
But, it's hard to tell. I mean, we know so much more now about combat trauma. Like I said, we used to be just post-traumatic stress, which was really named in 1976. Moral injury was just named back in 2009 by a Marine Corps psychologist. So it's kind of new. But now we have traumatic brain injury that we understand so much better for not only our warriors, but our NFL players, right?
Right.
And then military sexual trauma, which is a huge issue. And there's a component of healing and forgiveness that has to happen with that as well, for both men and women, primarily women, though. And now that women are involved in every part of the military, that's going to become an increasingly difficult issue to deal with. But all of those things can come up in Reboot. And many warriors have more than one of those diagnoses. They don't just have post-traumatic stress. They have moral injury, and they have traumatic brain injury on top of it, and maybe military sexual trauma. I know several warriors who have all four.
Wow.
Wow.
And I don't want to tell personal stories on the air today. Some of them are too graphic to tell. But we need God's grace to heal this.
Reboot Alliance and the Reboot Combat Recovery, of course, is happening on January 8th. Is there a cost associated with this or
Absolutely
anything?
no cost. We are being funded by a 501c3 entitled Operation Military Family. That's run by a good friend of mine, Mike Schindler. Thanks, Mike. He's funding it for us. And the meals, again, are being provided by area restaurants. And people who would like to sign up, just go to rebootrecovery.com. It takes about 90 seconds.
And there's locations all over the United States.
There are.
I'm
There
looking
are.
at the map right now.
There's 2 courses at JBLM right now. If someone who's listening is in Pierce County, there's courses being offered at JBLM. There's courses up in Everett that I'm aware of. But this will be the first course ever in North Mason and South Kitsap County.
Yeah, there's a location list available all around our listening area, the Reboot Alliance. Well, Roy, thank you for bringing this to our attention and talking with us about this. Again, January 8th, it's Tuesdays from 6 to 8, dinner and child care provided. It is to bring the family together and talk about these things.
And it'll run until about March 26th. We'll have our graduation ceremony on Tuesday night, March 26th.
Well, if you get another Shelton one coming up in the spring, give us a holler.
Absolutely.
We'll
Will
get
do.
you in.
Definitely.
Roy Harrington, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks, guys.
Again, thanks to Peninsula Credit Union for offering up time on iFiber One News Radio's Daybreak for 501c3 nonprofit organizations who want to get their message out to you. If you're a nonprofit who'd like to get a word out, email Jeff at ifiberone.com.